Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
All right, Matthew, for starters, the budget coming out this week, what are your sort of expectations and what are you hoping comes out of it?
Well, my expectations are probably a little bit different to what I'm hoping for. Certainly, we like to see continued investment in regional areas. There's a number of programs that the last government ran that were quite beneficial to regional areas, and I fully understand that a new government comes in and they might want to change the name of some of those programs and change the way they do things, and we're quite comfortable with that, provided the money continues to flow, and that's the really important part. We want to make sure that money continues to flow. The potential for regional cities is absolutely there. We'd like to see more funding coming in for housing, obviously. One of the great problems that we've got, and it sounds silly to say a great problem, but we've got lots of people who want to move to regional cities and they're going to those regional areas. The population needs more employees, so that's all good news, but they don't always have enough housing. So more funding for housing, definitely. Getting some of those skills out to regional areas, we really want to see some money on that. And roads, I know it almost goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. We certainly need more money for roads. We've got a pinch point program that we're running at the moment to look at various pinch points across the state. So we've got funding to run that program to look at those pinch points. Once we get to the point where we have all those different pinch points across the state, we'll definitely be asking for more money for those roads to really alleviate some of those bottlenecks across the state. Port connectivity is a problem as well. We want to make sure that we've got those three ports, Botany, Canberra and Newcastle, all being operational. And probably the last one, and I don't think we'll see this in the budget, but the last one I'd love to see is a slight change in the methodology for forecasting growth. All the results we've seen over the last decade or more has shown that the population forecasting from the state government has always been well under what the real results show. And of course, the problem with that is that we don't then get all the services that we might need in regional areas, so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where then people don't move there because we don't have the services.
Right, well, we might just go back to something you said a little earlier about more tradespeople in the regions. You're looking for sort of greater investment in TAFE, or what would you like to see there coming out of this budget?
There's probably a couple of parts of it. One part is definitely education. We've had a slight frustration with the state government, both the last state government and the new state government, where they have been focusing some of the jobs on just state government employees. So they've been focusing on getting teachers, police, nurses out to regional areas. And that's great. We certainly need more of those three occupations in regional areas. But the problem is that we need all employees across a whole range of different sectors in regional areas. So if a nurse or a teacher or a police person wants to move to a regional area and they can't find an accountant, or they can't get a coffee, or they can't go and find a restaurant, if you haven't got all the other employment opportunities there covered, then people won't really like those regional areas. So we believe there is work to be done in a whole range of areas. You talk about tradespeople, that is just one of those areas. And I think part of it is education. If we can tell people in metropolitan areas, educate people in metropolitan areas that there are jobs, typically the unemployment rate across regional cities across the state is lower than the unemployment rate average across the state, so lower than the metro areas. So that's a really important part, letting people know there are jobs there, and then certainly investment in making sure we can continue to skill people up, whether that be in TAFE or other areas, and continuing to increase those skills I think is important.
Do you think that's a bit of a misconception from people living in metropolitan areas, that there aren't a lot of jobs in regional areas?
Absolutely, and I base this entirely on my conversations with taxi drivers. Every time I jump in a taxi in Sydney, I want to do a little survey. So I'll talk to the taxi driver about regional areas, regional cities, what do they know about them, a whole range of questions. One of the common things that I hear, and it's not just taxi drivers, I'm being a little bit cute there, you do see it in surveys as well, people in metropolitan areas think that in regional areas there's two common misconceptions. One, there's no jobs. Why would I go to a regional area? I couldn't get a job there. And two, everyone in a regional area must be a farmer. And if I take Dubbo as one example of one of our regional cities, the employment in farming and the farming sector only makes up 2.5% of our total employment. So on average, you're not going to see a farmer. You run into any person that's got a job in Dubbo or across most of our regional cities, there's a pretty good chance they're not going to be a farmer. In fact, it's very unlikely they're going to be a farmer. So that is really part of that education, and that's where we've had some money spent from all three levels of government previously in programs like Evo Cities, and Evo Cities were very successful in really educating people in metropolitan areas about what was on offer in regional locations. We don't have that same program, that same advertising, and we don't have the same commitment from certainly the state government to help us educate people in metropolitan areas.
Well, bringing you back to the budget, do you think there could be greater investment in advertising as well to encourage people or at least make them aware in metropolitan areas of these opportunities in regional Australia?
Regional cities are certainly pitched to both the last state government and the new state government about a program to help people find some of those jobs and really educate and advertise some of those opportunities there. And unfortunately, those opportunities, which we didn't think were that expensive, we were pitching a program that was going to cost about $2.5 million over 4 years. Unfortunately, that fell on deaf ears and we didn't get the support for it. We had some mild support, but when it came to signing the cheque, we couldn't get the final support of it. So that'd be lovely to see that in the budget. I'm not hearing anything that might be in the budget, but it would be fantastic to see something like that in the budget. Just a way of making sure that people in metropolitan areas know that there are alternatives. One of the other disappointments that we saw recently was there was a concept around workplace hubs. Now, the idea of a workplace hub makes a lot of sense, and we did see some announcements around some of the regional cities where a workplace hub was going to be part of it. And this was an area that had one large dedicated building that gave government employees all the same facilities they would have sitting in somewhere like 52 Martin Place in Sydney, where a lot of government employees sit, but doing it in regional locations. And unfortunately, and again, if I use Dubbo as an example, there was an announcement in May this year that they had the plans finalised and were going out to tender for a workplace hub that would house over 700 government employees in the one location. Now, that's great news for Dubbo. We were pushing for that for other regional cities across the state as well. It makes a lot of sense. And that number of employees in a regional location makes a difference. By August, that had been scaled back to not a new building. They were going to do a refurb of an existing building and cutting the employment numbers back to 440 from that original 700. So that was disappointing to see a backward step in something that we thought was very exciting, and we were pitching for that workplace hub concept across all cities.
Right. Now, you mentioned a lot of about connectivity as well. What are you sort of hearing in the budgets going to be related to that?
I'm not hearing anything additional for roads, for example. I met recently with the Honourable Jenny Aitchison MP, who's the the Minister for Regional Transport and Roads, and there was definitely an ongoing commitment to election promises, but I didn't hear any new money for roads. And roads are certainly in a better condition than they were at the end of last year. We've had some dry weather, and that means that work crews can get out and do some work on the roads, but there's still a lot of work to be done on the roads. And to give you an idea, again, I'll use Dubbo as an example, our annual budget for roads, and this is for new construction, for repairs, for all the work on our roads, is typically around about $30 million. We would estimate our infrastructure backlog at being somewhere around $60 million on our roads alone. So we would need 2 years worth of our budget just to be dedicated to fixing up our backlog on roads to get back to square one. So that's a common scenario across many cities across the state and regional cities across the state. And so we'd love to see some more money, but I'm not hearing there's any more significant money for the road network.
Right. And moving further west of Dubbo, I mean, places like Broken Hill, Wilcannia, Walgett, Lightning Ridge. Are you hearing anything there in the budget at all for those sort of areas in particular, or just more of the same?
More of the same. One of the things that is a little bit of a concern until we see the detail is that they might be talking about creating some regional trust fund, maybe $350 million being put into some form of a regional trust fund that community groups could make application to. And the concern that I have with this, and again, I haven't seen the detail on this yet, it's only a brief snapshot I heard that this might be a possibility, is that it seems to be taking the power away from councils, for example, and putting the application process into community groups. And a lot of community groups out there do some wonderful work, but when you start to get to the point where you've got to put in applications, there's an expensive process in putting in an application for some funding, and a lot of those community groups don't have that funding. And the ultimate community group, I believe, is a council. A council's there for the community. A council's got the right governance structure already set up, but the council's also got that ability to put in those funding applications. And even when I talk to some small councils, sometimes small councils say they can't afford to put in a funding application because it is expensive to put in all the information they need in an application. If you left that to community groups, sometimes you just wouldn't find those funding processes to be realised in terms of getting that money out the door from government, because those community groups just wouldn't have the money, the funds to be able to put all the information together for a funding application.
Well, it looks like it's going to be a tough budget. I think it was revealed earlier this year, $17 billion deficit the Labor government were facing. I did see one thing, though. There's been a forecast of $1.4 billion for regional schools as well. I think there's $3.5 billion for schools in Sydney's west and southwest. Is that a good sign as well? It seems like quite a substantial amount of money for the regions there.
Anything that comes to the regions is a good idea, and certainly that'd be what we'd be pushing for, making sure there's money going out through regional areas. One of the things that we've certainly heard in meetings that we've been having with various ministers, including the Treasurer, every minister we spoke to said we've been left with a huge hole. $180 billion was one of the numbers thrown around by many ministers, so don't expect anything too exciting in this budget. And I think a lot of that discussion was to prepare people in general for a pretty tough budget. It was also mentioned several times that this is a September budget, not an end of financial year budget. Don't worry too much that this budget will be tough because it's only 9 months away before the next budget is handed down in June next year. The unfortunate part with that is that having any budget that might have some negative connotations can hurt confidence and can also stall momentum. And at the moment, after COVID, we've had a fairly good amount of momentum in regional cities. People in Sydney areas, metropolitan areas, realised that there was something that they could do in regional areas. They found regional areas, population in regional areas certainly went up, and we want to keep taking advantage of that and ride that momentum. Having a budget that isn't kind to regional areas could potentially stall that momentum.
All right. Matthew Dickinson, thanks very much for your time.
Always my pleasure, Bill. Thank you for talking to me.
Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickinson from Dubbo Regional Council.